guys, and welcome to another vlog. You guys have requested that I go through how I edit some of my photos. And there's a recent photo I took in London, which I really like, but it took a lot of editing. And I mean a lot of editing. I'm not one to often use Photoshop in my images. Normally there's just a very light touch on Lightroom. But this one I took a lot longer. I went into Photoshop and added some bits, and so I thought it might be quite a fun one to show you the before and after, just because it is so drastic compared to most of my images. Okay, cool. So this here is a photo I took of the London skyline. I took this in Greenwich last month. It's a pretty nice image, but it doesn't have an awful lot of colour and it doesn't have an awful lot of action. The problem is the Thames is a dirty river, and you're not really going to get reflections, but that's kind of really what I was going for. So I'm going to basically show you how I edit the image and then edit in a reflection. And I think it looks really cool. Like, I'm really happy with how the photo came out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of my presets that I often use on my images, just the latest preset here. The main thing that this preset does is I use this curve. So using the tone curve, I basically pull up the darks, the shadows, and I want a rough S shape, not that dramatic, but roughly I go for an S shape, just to lighten the highlights and to fade off the dark. So if you see up here we have the temperature. I'm gonna use the arrows here just to bring in some oranges, and it's gone quite green, so I'm gonna bring in some reds. There you see, so that's looking better already. I've been able to create a bit more of a warm glow. So highlights all the way down. Shadows can come up a bit because I wanna see the skyline. Whites as well. And the blacks can go down a bit. So for this photo I used my 10-22 lens, which is obviously meant for a crop sensor, but it actually fits onto my 5D for some reason, and I've been really enjoying just playing around with it for things like skylines and for photos around London of buildings and cityscapes. It's really nice because it just gives a totally different perspective. Now, before I forget, I'm going to change the size of the image to an 8.5:11 ratio. This is just because this is perfect for Instagram. Something like that. Okay, so the image is looking so much better now. I really like how this is coming along. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick the buildings, because for me they're looking a little bit too saturated. So I'm just going to get my highlights and my whites and just desaturate those ever so slightly. Yeah, cool. I'm happy with that. So just as a recap, what we've essentially done, the main things I've done here is I've warmed up the image, I've brought out the blues and I've brought out the reds. So temperature and tint are the two main things, and also the tone curve. I've just created that S effect. So now I've opened the image in Photoshop. You can see this is looking really nice. The only problem is there's no reflection. So to get a reflection in the water, I'm gonna cut straight from the background is fine. Grab the top half of the image, being sure to take just up to where the water starts. Copy and paste that and it creates a new layer. So when you've got that new layer, you go Command T, and then just go to up the top where you can set the vertical scale and go -100. That essentially will flip the image, and you can drag that down to create your reflection. Awesome. It's worth just zooming in here and making sure that you're not overlapping the images. Go up to where it says filter, and we're going to go filter, blur, and then we're going to choose motion blur. Now you can play around with this, but I've been using a 90-degree angle and about 30 pixels. That seems to work for me. What we're trying to do now is create a water effect. So now let's go layer, new layer. Okay. and we're just gonna paint this layer white. So now we have a new layer that is white, and we're gonna go filter, add noise. So filter, noise, add noise. And with noise, I'm gonna put it all the way up to about 400, as high as you can go. And we're gonna choose the distribution, and we're also gonna go monochromatic. Now we're gonna go back to filter and create a motion blur. Angle, we want it to be 0 because you want that blur to be going along the image as if you're creating that rippled water effect. I would really go for something around the 30, maybe 40. So now you go Command L and we choose the blacks, the midtones and the whites. Okay, so now we go and we edit the levels of this new layer. I'm gonna drag the blacks up to around 110, should be fine. I'm gonna bring the midtones to around 1.5, and the highlights I'm also gonna bring to around 220, should be fine. Cool, so that's looking pretty good. Cool, so now let's just make this opacity of 30. Then we can see what we're working with. So you can see what I've done. I might even go 20 for the opacity. Yeah, I think 20 is better on that. Do you see the effect it's done? It's created almost a ripple effect. So just by adding that layer of noise, we've created some kind of water effect. Now, before you do anything else, go to transform and change the perspective, because it just makes it slightly more realistic. There we go. So if we bring those bottom corners out, the top two come in. I want the perspective of this layer to be going inwards towards the center of the image. So that looks about right. I'm gonna save that. But now you can see here, this layer is slightly over the top of my buildings. So I'm just gonna make sure I cut that layer down to where the water starts. Okay, so the last thing I do, now I've got the opacity of that layer to around 20%, I'll just right click on that layer, go blending options, and I'm just gonna go blend mode down to soft light. Just makes the water slightly lighter. So now we've got that, I'm really happy with the image. All I think it needs is a little bit of darkening, a little bit of shadows in the water, because for me, so the easiest way of doing that is to grab the layer of the water and go Command U, taking the lightness down a tiny bit. I might just go back to the image adjustment, brightness, and just bring the brightness of that layer down slightly. So I'm going to bring the brightness of that layer down to around -50. And for me, that is looking so much better. There's just one thing left to do. On this water reflection layer, I'm going to go and I'm going to grab the smudge tool. Because the fact is, when you're having water scene, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be lumps and bumps. So if we grab that smudge tool, which is here. So if we get a brush size of around 400 pixels, hardness of 0 and a strength of probably about 10, maybe 12%. Just grab sections of the water that you want to smudge, but then you can just try and do a motion of a wave as you're using the tool. And you can do a long one, you can just play around. So I've gone for a few long ones, a few shorter ones. And that is how I create a reflection in the water and a nice sunrise image. This is the before and this is the after. There's the final image. And it's super easy to do, it's super quick to do. It really is just about changing and making those subtle changes. Honestly, I could spend all day on that one image. There's still little things I'm looking at now and I'm thinking, is that realistic? Should I add a little bit more depth to the water? as a quick run through, I think it's perfect. I think it's a really easy way of creating that reflection effect, making this London sunrise image look pretty cool. I'm really happy with it. And that is it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's video. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions on how to do an image like this, let me know in the comments and I will try my best to answer them. See you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching and go well.